Hey Reddit, I don't even know how to start this because my hands are shaking. I've read so many stories on here about betrayal, but I never thought I'd be the one typing this. I'm 37, my wife, Megan, is 34, and we've been married for 10 years. We have 2 kids, an 8-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter. Life wasn't perfect, but I thought it was good. We had our ups and downs like every couple, but I never suspected that anything was seriously wrong. Until last weekend. Megan told me she was going to spend the weekend at her mom's house, about 100 kilometers away, to help her with some medical appointments. Her mom had been feeling unwell lately, so it wasn't unusual. She packed a bag Friday morning, kissed the kids goodbye, and hugged me like nothing was out of the ordinary. She even texted me updates later that day, saying her mom was grateful she was there. I didn't think much of it until Saturday afternoon when our neighbor, Mrs. Collins, randomly stopped by. She's in her 60s, very chatty, and always eager to talk about her outings. She mentioned how lovely the weekend was and casually said something that made my heart stop. You know, I think I saw Megan yesterday. I didn't want to bother her, but wasn't that the same hotel you stayed at for your anniversary last year? I swear she was just walking in when I was leaving. I froze. At first, I thought Mrs. Collins was mistaken. Megan couldn't be at a hotel 500 kilometers away. She was supposed to be with her mom, right? I laughed it off, told her Megan was with family, and even made a joke about her eyesight. But deep down, something gnawed at me. When Mrs. Collins left, I pulled up my phone and checked Megan's location through the app we'd set up years ago for safety. We rarely used it, and it felt almost wrong to snoop, but I needed to reassure myself that everything was fine. My stomach dropped. The little dot that represented Megan wasn't anywhere near her mom's house. It wasn't even in the same direction. It was in a completely different city, miles away from where she said she'd be. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, refreshing it over and over, hoping it was some kind of glitch. It wasn't. By now, my heart was racing, and a million scenarios played out in my head. Maybe her mom had an emergency and had to be transferred to a different hospital? Maybe she was visiting a relative and forgot to tell me? Or maybe... No, I didn't want to think about the other possibility. I couldn't sit still. I called her, trying to keep my voice calm. She answered on the second ring, sounding perfectly normal. She told me she was just running errands for her mom and would call me back later. I wanted to believe her, but something about her tone felt off. That's when I made a decision that changed everything. I told the kids I needed to check on their mom and called a family friend to come watch them. Then I got in my car and started driving. To where? To that little dot on my phone. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. As I drove, I kept replaying the past few months in my head, searching for clues I might have missed. Had she been distant, distracted, spending more time on her phone? My mind spiraled with questions, and every kilometer I covered felt heavier than the last. When I finally pulled into the city where her location was pinned, it was nearly midnight. The dot on the app led me straight to a hotel. Not a big fancy one, but one of those quiet, tucked-away places you'd only stay at if you didn't want to be noticed. My hands were trembling as I parked my car and sat there in the dark. I stared at the hotel, trying to convince myself to go in. Was I really about to do this? I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the glowing sign of the hotel. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my stomach was in knots. I didn't want to believe what my gut was telling me, but I couldn't turn back now. I needed answers. I walked into the lobby, trying to act casual, even though I could feel the sweat on my palms. The night receptionist barely glanced at me as I stood there, pretending to look at a fake potted plant while I opened the Find My app on my phone again. Megan's location was still showing up here. She was somewhere in this building. I mustered up the courage to approach the desk. "Excuse me," I said, forcing a smile. "My wife is staying here, but her phone died, and I can't get in touch with her. I forgot her room number. Could you help me out?" The receptionist hesitated, clearly unsure if she should share that kind of information. But when I gave her Megan's name and showed her the app as proof, she finally nodded and tapped at her computer. "Room 214, she said. "Room 214. The walk down the hallway felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare. My legs were heavy, and I felt like I was moving in slow motion. I stopped in front of the door, staring at the number on the plaque. 214. I raised my hand to knock but froze. What if I was wrong? What if this was some big misunderstanding, and Megan was inside doing something completely innocent? I almost turned around right there. But then I heard it. Laughter. A man's voice. And Megan's. My blood ran cold. My wife's laugh, the one I'd heard 1,000 times, was coming from the other side of the door. And she wasn't laughing with her mom or some old friend. She was laughing with a man. Without thinking, I knocked. The laughter stopped instantly. For a moment, there was silence, and then I heard shuffling, hurried whispers, and the sound of feet moving toward the door. My heart was beating so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The door opened just a crack, and there she was, Megan. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing a bathrobe that clearly wasn't hers. The look on her face when she saw me was one I'll never forget. Pure panic. "James?" she stammered, her voice shaky. I didn't even need to look inside the room to know the truth. But then, over her shoulder, I saw him. A man, shirtless, standing awkwardly by the bed. He looked as shocked as she did, maybe even more. For a moment, none of us said anything. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Megan?" I finally said, my voice barely more than a whisper. What is this?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, blocking the doorway like she thought she could keep me from seeing the obvious. But it didn't matter. I'd already seen enough. I didn't wait for an explanation. I turned around and walked away, my legs moving on autopilot. Behind me, I could hear Megan calling my name, her voice desperate. She was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't care. I got back into my car and sat there, staring at the steering wheel. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My wife, the woman I'd built a life with, the mother of my children, had lied to my face and was spending the weekend with another man, in a hotel while I was home taking care of our kids. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember how I made it back without crashing. When I walked into the house, the kids were asleep, and our family friend had left a note saying they'd been good and went to bed on time. I stood there in the quiet of our living room, feeling like my entire world had just been ripped apart. The next morning, Megan came home. She looked awful, like she hadn't slept at all. I didn't give her a chance to say anything. I told her I knew everything. She tried to deny it at first, claiming it wasn't what it looked like, but her excuses fell apart quickly. She eventually admitted it had been going on for months. Months. I asked her one question. Was it worth it? She didn't have an answer. She just cried. I filed for divorce that week. She begged me to reconsider, to think about the kids, but I told her I wasn't the one who destroyed our family. She did. Now, I'm picking up the pieces and trying to figure out how to move forward. The hardest part has been explaining everything to the kids. They don't understand why their mom doesn't live here anymore or why dad is so sad all the time. I never thought I'd be the guy writing one of these stories. But here I am. And let me tell you, betrayal doesn't just break your heart. It breaks everything.